Karl Weber signed the last line thinking it was routine paperwork, while Thomas Mallory pocketed the key detail and had to use it in silence without letting Weber realize he had given it away. The transport truck rolled through the gate after midnight and did not stop until it reached a yard inside the fence. Karl Weber, a German prisoner, sat on a bench with a cloth over his eyes and a cord biting his wrists. Guards kept him moving and kept him quiet. Weber tried to count turns, then lost the count when the truck doubled back. The truck stopped. A door opened. The air changed from cold to stale. The cloth came off and Weber saw a corridor and a small office under one lamp. A clerk waited behind a desk. The clerk did not ask for a prisoner number. The clerk slid a card across the desk and tapped the top line. Post Office Box 1142. The clerk asked for Weber's name and birth year and wrote them down without comment. A guard emptied Weber's pockets on the desk. A watch, a belt, a small notebook. The clerk sealed each item in a plain bag and wrote the same address on the tag. Weber had been processed before. A normal camp used numbers and stamps and standard language. This room used an address. Weber watched his life turn into mail and decided this place was not part of the normal system. He chose a rule for himself. He would speak only when it helped him. The guards walked Weber down a hallway and timed every turn. They kept him from seeing other doors open. When Weber demanded the camp name in German, a guard answered with the same flat phrase, Post Office Box 1142. They locked Weber into a small room with a bed, a chair, and a wash basin. Weber tested the handle once, then sat and stared at the ceiling vent. He listened for other prisoners. He heard only steps and keys. The silence pressed down, and Weber decided to press back. Thomas Mallory waited in the corridor until the guards left. Thomas Mallory was a German-speaking intelligence interviewer in the United States Army, assigned here because he could make questions sound like filing. Mallory stepped into the intake office, read the address on the card, and put it back. The address was the cover, and the cover mattered more than pride and more than speed. The facility sat inside Fort Hunt in Virginia, but the mailing address was the only name the fence allowed. Mallory opened Weber's file. It held only approved facts: name, rank, capture area, and a job title broad enough to hide 1,000 jobs. It did not say why Weber had been pulled out of the regular pipeline. Mallory had to make Weber build the missing record, one sentence at a time, without letting Weber notice the pressure. A liaison officer met Mallory near the interview rooms. She carried orders from an intelligence staff that Mallory never saw. She restated the rules because the rules were the walls this place lived inside. No physical force, no marks, no threats that could be repeated later, no shouting that could carry, no promises about the future. If Weber ever spoke about this place, the story had to sound like routine processing behind a mailing address. Mallory nodded and went to work. In a normal camp, a failed session wasted time. Here, a failed session could stain the whole project. If Weber left with a clear picture of what happened here, the cover would crack. Mallory entered the interview room with a folder and a pen. He told the recorder to use plain paper, not printed forms. He told the recorder to write everything, even the parts that sounded useless. He placed a cup of hot water near the chair facing the door. The cup was not kindness. The cup was a tool that gave Weber something to do with his hands besides grip his fear. A guard reported that Weber kept asking for a camp name and kept staring at the ceiling vent. Mallory told the guard to answer every question with the cover address and nothing else. At noon, the guards brought Weber in. Weber sat without being told and watched the corners of the room, then watched the folder, then watched Mallory's hands. Mallory greeted Weber in German and introduced himself as an officer assigned to records. Mallory said accurate files reduced mistakes. Mallory kept his tone flat and his words ordinary. Weber answered with a formula: name, rank, service number. Weber stopped there and waited for Mallory to cross a line. Mallory did not cross it. Mallory asked Weber to spell a street name from childhood. Mallory asked where Weber trained. Mallory asked what job Weber held before the war. The questions stayed on safe ground, but they forced Weber to build a timeline out loud. Weber began to talk because the questions made him feel in control. Weber offered stories that made him seem capable but unimportant. Weber watched Mallory's face for a reaction. Mallory watched the paper. Mallory asked for dates, then asked again in a different order. Mallory repeated Weber's phrasing back with small changes and waited. When Weber corrected a word or a sequence, Mallory wrote the correction down as if the correction was the point. Weber tested Mallory. Weber dropped a place name into the story that did not fit what Weber had already said and paused after it. Mallory did not challenge it. Mallory asked Weber to repeat the place name slowly for the file and wrote it in careful letters. Weber felt a pulse of confidence. If the file was a weapon, Weber would try to poison it. Mallory shifted to habits instead of claims. Mallory asked what time Weber's workday started. Mallory asked who kept keys. Mallory asked who only showed up when something went wrong. Weber answered because the questions sounded like gossip. Each answer forced Weber to name routines and roles that could be checked later without tying the check back to Weber. Mallory asked Weber to walk through 1 week twice, once forward and once backward. Weber kept the broad line steady, but the small steps shifted. Each shift forced a correction. Each correction gave Mallory a peg to pin to other paper. Weber sensed the net and pulled back. Weber returned to the formula again. Name, rank, service number. Weber stared at Mallory as if staring could end the meeting. Mallory let the formula sit. Mallory asked Weber to confirm the spelling of one supervisor's surname, then closed the folder and stood. The session ended without an argument. Weber could not point to a moment where Mallory had pushed too hard. After the guards led Weber away, Mallory tapped 2 lines on the paper and told the recorder to copy those lines onto a separate sheet with the time and the order Weber had spoken them. Mallory did not say Weber had lied. Mallory treated the lines like routine clerical work that would be filed and forgotten. The recorder sealed the sheet in a plain envelope and sent it down a corridor Weber would never see. An analyst who would never meet Weber would compare those lines against maps, captured papers, and other prisoner statements. The process stayed boring on purpose. Boredom hid the machine. That night, Weber sat alone and treated the camp's silence as an opponent. Weber spoke toward the ceiling vent in a normal voice, as if rehearsing a letter. Weber described a fake assignment in a fake unit with a fake timetable, then inserted one real detail inside the fake story, and waited. No one reacted. Breakfast came. The guard spoke only the cover address when Weber demanded a location. The lack of reaction did not calm Weber. It sharpened him. It told him the camp could hide its teeth. Mallory read the guard note about the late-night speech and felt the situation tilt. Weber was not only resisting questions, Weber was testing the walls. If Mallory showed knowledge too early, Weber would lock down. If Weber ever left certain of what this place did, Weber would teach others how to fight it. Mallory wrote one instruction on Weber's cover page for the team to see. They would treat Weber like a man filling out routine records. They would not chase bait. They would never let their knowledge appear early. They would build the case slowly, and they would make Weber believe his own need for a coherent story was the thing that betrayed him. Thomas Mallory read the analyst's note before daylight and did not let his face move. The note did not praise him. It did not accuse the prisoner either. The analyst had circled a place name Karl Weber had used and had drawn a route line that could not work with the roads on the map. The analyst wrote that the mismatch had only 2 clean causes. Weber had lied, or Weber had used a term that belonged to someone who knew the route by habit. Mallory folded the note once, memorized the circled word, and fed the paper into the stove. He would not leave a trail that could outlive the cover. He walked to the analyst room while the corridor was still empty. The analyst had a map open and a pencil worn down to wood. The analyst tapped the circled place name and then tapped the route line again. The analyst asked if Mallory wanted a formal warning placed in the file. Mallory refused. A warning would tell Weber what mattered if Weber ever got a glimpse of his own paperwork. Mallory told the analyst to keep checking the mismatch against anything that forced Weber to choose between two small details. Small details made people talk. Big accusations made people fight. When Mallory returned to his office, a liaison officer was waiting with a message and a hard look. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She said higher offices wanted usable conclusions soon. She said the cover could not survive rumors, and thin files created rumors inside the fence. Mallory asked for time and was given less than he needed. The liaison officer warned that a new interviewer could be assigned if the record stayed thin. Mallory had seen new people try to prove themselves by pushing too hard. That kind of push made noise. Mallory went back to the interview room and set the room the same way as before. He kept the same chairs, the same folder, the same cup of hot water. He told the recorder to use plain paper again and to write everything without adding labels that looked like interrogation. After lunch, guards brought Karl Weber in. Weber's posture was straighter than before. Weber looked at the ceiling vent first, then the folder, then Mallory's hands. Weber sat as if sitting was a decision he could still control. Mallory greeted Weber in German and spoke like a clerk correcting a file. Mallory said he needed to fix small errors from the previous entry. Mallory asked Weber to repeat the coastal place name slowly for the record. Weber repeated it with care and watched for a reaction. Mallory wrote it down and asked which road led into the town. Weber answered with a hedge about a curve and a church, then stopped. Mallory wrote church and moved on as if nothing had changed. Mallory asked what men ate during shift changes. Mallory asked who complained the most and who stole bread when no one watched. Weber answered because the question sounded like gossip, and gossip felt safe. Each answer locked another peg into the paper. Weber tried to take control by talking longer. Weber offered a story about loyal men working through air raids without breaking. Weber made himself sound tough and ordinary at the same time. Weber watched Mallory for admiration or anger. Mallory gave him neither. Mallory let the story run, then cut it into pieces with short requests. Mallory asked which day of the week it happened. Mallory asked which shift was on duty. Mallory asked who was missing afterward and where those men went. Mallory asked what paperwork followed and who signed it. Each request forced Weber to either slow down and become precise or keep moving and contradict himself. Weber chose speed. Weber answered, then corrected himself in the same breath. He replaced one direction word as if fixing a typo. The correction was quick and casual, and that made it dangerous. The recorder's pencil paused for a beat and then kept moving. Mallory did not look at the recorder. Mallory asked Weber to repeat the corrected phrase so the file would be clean, then pivoted to a question about laundry schedules. Weber saw the pivot and stiffened. Weber stopped telling stories. Weber returned to the only line he trusted: name, rank, service number. Mallory did not argue. Mallory asked one harmless spelling question and ended the session early. Weber left with the posture of a man who believed he had shut the door. When the door clicked, Mallory tapped the corrected phrase on the page and told the recorder to copy the surrounding sentences exactly, including the order the words had appeared. Mallory carried the copy himself to the analyst room and handed it over without explanation. Mallory gave the analyst one task: test the corrected word against everything else. That night, Weber used the camp's silence as an opponent. Weber spoke toward the ceiling vent in a normal voice, as if rehearsing a letter. Weber described a fake assignment in a fake unit with a fake schedule. Then, Weber inserted one real detail inside the fake story as bait. Morning came with no reaction. A guard delivered breakfast and answered every question with the cover address. The lack of response did not calm Weber. It told Weber the camp could hide its reactions on purpose. During the next walk down the corridor, one guard slipped and said in English, "Interview time," before switching back to German. Weber did not turn his head, but Weber's shoulders tightened. Weber stored the slip like a tool. Mallory heard about it within the hour and pulled that guard off the corridor. Mallory reassigned him to work where he would not speak to prisoners. The decision cost Mallory goodwill with the guard detail. Mallory paid it anyway. A single, careless phrase could give Weber a clean proof. The liaison officer returned at midday with pressure that had grown sharper. She said higher offices wanted a conclusion, not a diary of small questions. She said patience was close to gone. Mallory said inconsistencies were narrowing and cross-checks were running. He did not promise a breakthrough. Promises created deadlines, and deadlines made people reckless. That afternoon, Weber entered the interview room and spoke first. Weber gave name, rank, and service number, and then stared at the tabletop as if it was safer than Mallory's face. Mallory tried safe questions and got refusals. Weber claimed he did not recall supervisors. Weber claimed he did not recall mealtimes, schedules, road names, or shift changes. Weber had turned routine into stone. Mallory did not hit the stone. Mallory used procedure. Mallory said gaps would be filled by other sources. Mallory said mistakes would be corrected later. Mallory said those corrections would not care if the result made Weber look careless or unreliable. Weber listened without moving. Weber said he would provide only name, rank, and service number. Weber repeated it like a weapon. Mallory ended the session without anger and let the sentence stand. He needed tomorrow more than he needed to win today. Late that day, the analyst asked Mallory to step into the room so the message would not travel on paper. The analyst said the corrected direction word matched terminology found in other captured documents. The analyst said the term was tied to a transport route and a work schedule, and the pattern could be checked without ever mentioning Weber. Mallory returned to his office and locked the door. He could not confront Weber with the match. Confrontation would teach Weber which words mattered. Weber would go silent for weeks and would test the walls harder. Mallory needed a question that sounded dull and forced Weber to choose between two dull answers. Mallory wrote the question once on blank paper, then tore the page into strips and fed it into the stove. The question would exist only in his voice. After dusk, Weber walked back to his room without looking up at the vent. Weber had decided the camp watched and had decided the correct response was to stop feeding it anything at all. Mallory stayed at his desk and rehearsed the question until it sounded like a clerk correcting a minor entry. He practiced the face he would wear when Weber slipped. By morning, the next session was set. Weber would enter the same plain room. Mallory would ask for one small correction. Weber would have to pick one version or the other, and the file would turn on that choice. Thomas Mallory kept the folder closed until Karl Weber sat down, then opened it as if he were fixing a dull clerical mistake. Mallory greeted Weber in German and said the file could not be certified until one minor correction was settled. Weber gave his name, his rank, and his service number, then stopped. Mallory read one sentence from the earlier entry, then read it again with one word missing. He said the missing word was blocking the record and other sources would fill the gap anyway. Weber stared at the tabletop and refused. Mallory slid the folder a few inches closer, not toward Weber's hands, but toward Weber's eyes. He said strangers would write the story if Weber did not, and Weber could keep it consistent by correcting one line. Weber read the line. It was about a convoy leaving a worksite and choosing a road. Mallory offered two options in the same calm tone. He said Weber had described the convoy turning toward an inland road, but the clerk had written the coastal road. He asked which word Weber wanted in the record. Weber hesitated. Silence would protect him, but silence would also leave the other version on paper. He chose the inland word. Mallory wrote it down without any sign it mattered. He read the sentence back and said the correction needed Weber's initials to prevent disputes later. Weber leaned forward and felt the trap close after the fact. If he refused to initial, it would look like fear. If he initialed, it would look like routine. He initialed. Mallory closed the folder immediately and slid it away. He asked a harmless spelling question, as if the correction had never existed. Weber stood too fast. Two guards shifted a step forward. Mallory raised one hand and ended the session like a policy decision. The guards walked Weber out. At the corridor junction, Weber looked up at the ceiling vent again, as if staring at it could force the camp to reveal itself. Mallory waited until the footsteps faded and called the recorder in. He pointed to the corrected sentence and the initials. He told the recorder to copy the entire paragraph exactly, mark the time in plain language, and leave the page unmarked. Mallory sealed the copy and carried it himself to the analyst. The analyst tapped the inland word, drew a line on the map, and matched it to a route already circled in a captured document. The analyst said the correction aligned with a schedule pattern found elsewhere and could be checked without ever mentioning Weber. In the corridor, the liaison officer asked if Mallory had something usable. Mallory said he had a verified point that could be cross-checked and defended as routine records. The liaison officer said pressure from above would ease if the next checks held, and warned that if Weber ever understood which word had mattered, Weber would go silent for good. Mallory returned to his office and wrote the result in the cold format the system demanded. He did not write a dramatic story. He wrote elements: the corrected root word, the sentence around it, why it mattered, how to confirm it, and how to use it without pointing back to Weber. He added one warning in plain language. Any future interview had to sound like routine records, and no one was to reveal the importance of the word. Mallory locked the summary in the cabinet, then handed the only copy to the liaison officer at a set time in a corridor Weber never used. He did not linger. The less ceremony the system used, the less a prisoner could sense that anything had shifted. That night, Weber refused conversation. When guards moved him, Weber gave his name, his rank, and his service number, and nothing more. He had learned that small choices could be turned into weapons. Mallory spaced Weber's movements farther from everyone else and reduced the number of guards who handled him. He ordered every guard to answer every question with the same cover address and nothing else. Weber tried to force the system into the open with one loud claim in German that this was not a normal camp and that the place hid behind a mailing address. Guards cut him off and moved him before his voice could carry. Mallory read the report and shut down corridor talk with one instruction. Mallory brought Weber back to the interview room once more, not to press, but to keep Weber from treating silence as proof. Mallory asked harmless spelling questions, let Weber refuse, and ended the meeting quickly. Mallory gave Weber no new pressure and no clue about what had mattered. Days later, the liaison officer told Mallory that Weber would be moved to another holding arrangement inside the system. She did not name the destination. She said only that the file had been useful, and Weber could not be allowed to teach anyone else how to test the walls. Before dawn, guards took Weber out. Weber demanded the destination. A guard answered with the cover address. Weber spat the address back like a curse, then went quiet. The truck rolled through the gate and disappeared into the dark that had brought him in. Mallory returned to his desk and opened another file. The facility did not allow one man to become the whole mission. When the war ended, the liaison officer called a meeting in a room with no windows. Orders were plain and final. Duplicate notes were burned. Working copies were destroyed. Original files were sealed and sent into storage under the same cover address that had protected the work through the war. Everyone who had handled the papers signed a statement binding them to silence. Mallory signed without hesitation. Years later, people argued about what had happened behind the fence and guessed methods and outcomes. Mallory did not correct them. He kept one habit from the work. When a form needed a signature, he read every line before touching the pen.